Hey guys, tonight we're heading somewhere very, very cold. So maybe grab a blanket or two. Dim the lights. Let your shoulders drop a little because we're about to float out onto the vast, open steppe of Mongolia. And it is minus 50 degrees Celsius, which is the kind of temperature where your eyelashes freeze together, the kind where metal burns your skin, the kind where most of us would politely decide that survival is optional. But for the Mongols, this was just Tuesday. So settle in. Let's drift into a world of endless grasslands, roaring winter winds, felt walls, horse herds, and families who somehow thrived in a place that looks like it actively resents human life. The Mongolian steppe is enormous. It stretches across much of Mongolia and flows into parts of China and Russia. It is wide, it is open, it is dramatic in a very understated way. There are no forests to hide in, no tropical breezes, just rolling grassland that seems to go on forever. And in winter, that endless horizon turns white and brutal. Temperatures regularly plunge to minus 40 degrees Celsius, sometimes minus 50. The wind does not ask for permission, it simply arrives. It moves across the land with nothing to slow it down. No mountains in some regions, no tall trees, just you, your animals, and the universe testing your commitment to being alive. And yet, for thousands of years, Mongol families lived here, not in stone castles, not in heated brick houses, but in portable felt tents called gers. The ger is one of humanity's most quietly brilliant inventions. It looks simple, round, low, almost modest, but that round shape is doing serious work. The circular frame allows wind to slide around it instead of slamming into flat walls, which is helpful when the wind is basically trying to erase you from existence. The wooden lattice walls fold out like an accordion. Poles rise to meet a circular crown at the top. Over this frame, thick layers of felt are wrapped carefully and tied down with ropes made of horsehair. Felt, by the way, is not some decorative craft store material. It is dense, heavy, made from sheep's wool that has been cleaned, soaked, compressed, and rolled until it becomes a thick, insulating blanket. Wool traps air. Air is insulation. Insulation is survival. A winter ger could have multiple layers of felt, sometimes 3 or more. On top of that, there might be an outer canvas cover to protect against moisture and wind. Snow would pile against the sides, and instead of being a disaster, it would actually help insulate the walls further. So, while the outside temperature might be minus 50, inside the ger, it could hover around freezing or even warmer near the central stove. Which sounds terrible to us, but compared to outside, it's practically tropical. The stove sits in the center, always the center, because the ger is built around balance. Heat radiates evenly. Smoke rises through a small opening at the top. That opening can be adjusted, closed tightly in blizzards, opened slightly to let smoke escape. And around that stove, life unfolds. Families sleep in a circle along the walls. Beds are arranged carefully. The north side is traditionally the place of honor, often where elders or important guests sit. The west might be the men's side, the east the women's. Everything has a place, not because they were obsessed with organization, but because in a small, round space, chaos is not cozy. Now, let's talk about clothing. Because if you're going to survive minus 50, your fashion choices matter. The traditional Mongolian deal is a long robe, tied with a sash. It's layered, often lined with fur or sheepskin in winter.
The sash is not just decorative, it helps secure the robe tightly around the body, trapping heat. Underneath, more layers: wool shirts, trousers, thick socks, boots made of leather, sometimes lined with felt. And hats, always hats. Fur hats with ear flaps that could be tied down against the wind, because losing heat through your head in that climate is not a cute aesthetic choice, it is a problem. Children were bundled like small, determined marshmallows. Babies were sometimes wrapped and placed in padded cradles that could be strapped onto a saddle. Yes, strapped onto a saddle, because nomadic life did not pause for infancy. Which brings us to animals. Mongol survival was never just about people, it was about herds: horses, sheep, goats, yaks, camels in some regions. Animals were food, clothing, transportation, wealth, status, insurance policy. In winter, herders had to think carefully about grazing. Snow could cover grass. If the snow was too deep or iced over, animals could not reach food. This could lead to a dzud, a devastating winter disaster where massive numbers of livestock die. And when animals die in large numbers, humans suffer. So Mongols developed seasonal migration patterns. In warmer months, they moved to lush pastures. In winter, they sought valleys or areas with natural windbreaks, slight dips in the land, places where snow might not accumulate as harshly. They read the landscape like a book. They knew which slopes faced south and would catch more sunlight, which valleys would trap cold air, which rivers might freeze solid but still provide water if broken carefully.
Water, by the way, becomes a very interesting concept at -50. You don't just turn on a tap. You break ice, you melt snow, you manage fuel carefully so you don't burn through your entire winter supply trying to boil drinking water. Fuel often came from dried animal dung, which sounds unpleasant until you realize it burns efficiently and is widely available when you own large herds. In a treeless steppe, you use what you have. And what they had, they used with impressive practicality. Now, let's gently drift back in time to the era of Genghis Khan. Before he was the founder of a vast empire stretching across Eurasia, he was a child named Temujin, and his early life was not exactly comfortable. His father was poisoned. His family was abandoned by their tribe. They were left to survive on their own in the harsh steppe environment. Which means from a young age, Temujin learned how to endure cold, hunger, and isolation, not as some dramatic training montage, just as daily reality. Winter did not care about your political ambitions. You learned to ride early. Mongol children could sit on a horse almost as soon as they could walk. Horses were not just transport, they were survival machines. In winter, horses used their hooves to scrape snow away, exposing grass beneath. This ability was crucial. Other animals might starve if snow cover was thick. Horses, stubborn and strong, could often feed themselves, which meant humans who depended on horses had a better chance too. Mongols drank fermented mare's milk, known as irag. In winter, dairy was often dried into hard curds that could be stored for long periods. Meat was dried or frozen naturally by the cold. Nature provided refrigeration, enthusiastically. Diet was heavy in animal products. Fat was not the enemy. Fat was warmth. Calories were heat. And daily life did not stop because it was cold. People still rode out to check herds, still repaired tack, still socialized inside the ger. Storytelling became essential in long winters. Oral traditions flourished. Epics were recited. Genealogies remembered. When you are surrounded by endless white silence, words become warmth too. Community mattered. Gers were often set up in small clusters of related families, not tightly packed like a city, but close enough to help each other in emergencies. If a storm struck suddenly, neighbors could assist in securing tents. If animals were lost, men might ride together to retrieve them. Isolation could be deadly. Cooperation was survival. And despite the brutal cold, there was beauty. Clear winter nights on the steppe reveal skies thick with stars. No city lights, just the Milky Way spilling overhead. The air so cold it feels almost metallic in your lungs. Inside the ger, the stove glows softly. Tea simmers. Someone adjusts a felt blanket. Boots dry near the fire. Outside, the wind moves across the land like a restless spirit. And somehow, in that contrast between fury and warmth, life continues. There's something quietly humbling about a culture that mastered mobility instead of fighting the land with stone walls and permanent structures. They did not try to dominate the steppe. They adapted to it. They built homes that could be dismantled in hours, loaded onto ox carts or camels, moved when grass ran thin or weather shifted. Flexibility was power. And it's almost ironic, isn't it, that people living in felt tents on a frozen plain would go on to build one of the largest empires in history. From these gers rode armies that reshaped continents, yet at the heart of it all was a simple round tent, layered in wool, standing calmly against -50 degrees. So, as you lie there, warm and comfortable, maybe under central heating that works with the push of a button, imagine the quiet resilience of a Mongol winter camp. No radiators, no electric blankets, just wool, fire, animals, and generations of hard-earned knowledge. And the wind, always the wind, sliding past the curved walls. In the next stretch of our long, slow journey, we'll drift deeper into the rhythms of daily winter life, how marriages worked in nomadic camps, how children were raised to be fearless riders, and how even in the coldest months, politics and rivalries quietly simmered beside the stove. But for now, just picture that glowing circle of warmth in an ocean of frost, and let your mind wander across the frozen steppe.
All right, settle back in. Adjust your imaginary fur hat. The wind is still howling politely outside our ger on the steppe of Mongolia. It's still -50, which, again, is not a temperature most of us would volunteer for. Inside, though, there is order, there is routine, and routine is what keeps people sane when the world outside looks like a frozen moonscape. Winter on the steppe was not just about survival, it was about rhythm. You wake before sunrise, not because you want to, but because animals do not care about your sleep schedule. Someone stirs the coals in the central stove. The fire never truly goes out if it can be helped. Letting it die completely in deep winter is like voluntarily inviting misery into your home. Tea is brewed, often salty milk tea, thick and warming. It sounds unusual, it absolutely is, but when you live in a place where calories equal survival, delicate flavors are not the priority. Warmth is. The eldest members of the family rise slowly. Elders were deeply respected in Mongol culture. In a land where written records were limited, memory was power. An older person carried stories, genealogies, tribal alliances, and grudges on the steppe could last generations. Very cozy. Children, meanwhile, were not raised to be fragile. Even in winter, boys and girls would step outside to help with tasks. They learned to handle animals early. A small child might help gather dried dung for fuel. Another might carry water, carefully chipped from ice. It sounds harsh. It was harsh,
but competence was a gift. In extreme climates, helplessness is dangerous. Marriage, too, continued through winter, not with elaborate palace ceremonies, but with negotiations that often happened inside warm gers over bowls of tea. Marriages among Mongol clans were strategic. They created alliances, they reduced the chance of conflict, or occasionally complicated it beautifully. Let's gently float back to the era of Genghis Khan, when alliances were everything. Temujin, as he was born, married Berta when he was still young. Their union was partly arranged, partly political, because of course it was. On the steppe, romance was nice, but survival came first. When Berta was kidnapped by a rival tribe, it was not just a personal tragedy, it was a political disaster. Temujin's response, forming alliances to rescue her, shows how deeply intertwined family life and power were. But let's return to our quiet winter camp. No armies tonight, just domestic politics. Inside a ger, space was limited, and when temperatures trap you indoors for long stretches, personalities become noticeable. Imagine 3 generations sharing one circular room. Someone snores. Someone complains that the tea is too salty. Someone insists the stove needs more fuel. And yet, there was a deep cultural emphasis on harmony within the household. The ger itself symbolized unity. Its circular shape had no corners for resentment to hide in. Everything was visible, everything shared. The north side, often considered the place of honor, might hold treasured objects, saddles, weapons, religious items. Later, with the spread of Tibetan Buddhism, small shrines became common. Monks traveled across the steppe, even in winter, though probably not enthusiastically. Religious practice blended with older shamanistic traditions. The sky, known as Tengri, held deep spiritual significance. The vast open heavens above the steppe were not just scenery, they were sacred. And when winter storms rolled across the land, it was easy to believe in powerful spirits. The wind did not whisper, it roared. Snow did not drift gently, it attacked sideways. Yet even in these conditions, herders rode out daily. Horses were brushed down, checked for frostbite. Sheep were guided to exposed patches of grass. Camels, those famously unimpressed creatures, endured the cold with thick winter coats. Livestock were often brought close to the camp at night. Their bodies added subtle warmth to the immediate area. Their presence also meant protection. Wolves roamed the steppe in winter, lean and desperate. A lone herder facing wolves at dusk is not a dramatic movie scene. It was a practical concern. So families worked together. Night watches were common. Dogs barked warnings.
Food during winter was straightforward. Meat from autumn slaughter was stored frozen. Slices could be cut off and boiled in large iron pots. Fat was prized. Bone broth simmered slowly, filling the ger with a rich scent that probably felt like luxury. Dairy products, dried in summer, were rehydrated. Hard cheese curds were chewed slowly. Butter was added generously to tea. Again, calories were everything. And despite the simplicity, there were moments of celebration. Midwinter festivals marked the turning of the year. Gifts were exchanged. Elders offered blessings. Later, under the influence of Buddhism, the Lunar New Year, Tsagan Sar, became a major event. Families would clean their gers thoroughly before the holiday, which in -50 is an act of optimism. Visitors traveled between camps, exchanging greetings and food. Imagine riding across a frozen plain to visit relatives, bundled in layers of fur,
breath crystallizing in the air. It sounds exhausting. It was also essential for maintaining social bonds, because isolation could slowly erode a community. Mongol society relied on networks of loyalty. Clans formed larger tribal confederations. Leaders rose based on charisma, military skill, and the ability to distribute resources fairly. In winter, a leader's competence was tested quietly. Could he ensure his followers had safe grazing grounds? Could he organize support during a dzud? A disastrous winter that killed thousands of animals could weaken a clan more effectively than any enemy army. And in that sense, surviving winter was political. The same skills that allowed Mongols to endure -50 degrees also made them formidable beyond the steppe: mobility, planning, cooperation, endurance. When armies later rode west into Central Asia and even parts of Eastern Europe, they carried these survival instincts with them. The soldiers were accustomed to discomfort. Cold campaigns did not shock them. Scarcity did not terrify them. But here, tonight, we stay in the ger. The empire can wait. A child curls closer to the stove. An elder softly recounts a story of ancestors who endured even harsher winters. Outside, the wind scrapes snow across the ground in long, whispering sheets. The felt walls hold. The ropes stay tight. The circular crown at the top frames a slice of night sky. And inside that simple structure, built from wood, wool, and deep generational knowledge, life continues calmly. There is something almost meditative about it. No frantic scrambling, no dramatic heroics, just steady routines repeated day after day. Feed the animals, maintain the fire, share food, tell stories, sleep, wake, repeat. At -50 degrees, survival is not glamorous, it is patient. And patience, as the Mongols proved again and again, can quietly change the world. So let the wind keep blowing outside. Let the snow drift higher against the curved walls. Inside, the stove glows, the tea is warm, and the steppe, for all its frozen severity, feels, just for a moment, like home.
All right. The fire is still glowing softly in the center of our ger. The wind hasn't gotten bored yet. It's still sweeping across the open plains of Mongolia like it has a personal grudge against humanity. And tonight, we're going to drift into the harsher side of winter. Not dramatic, not cinematic, just steady, relentless cold. Because surviving -50 degrees wasn't about one clever invention. It was about endurance layered on endurance, much like the felt walls around us. Let's talk about storms. A true winter storm on the steppe does not announce itself politely. The horizon simply disappears. The sky and the ground blur into one pale sheet. Snow lifts from the earth and spins sideways. Visibility drops to almost nothing. In those moments, the world shrinks to the inside of the ger. Families would secure every rope. The felt coverings were tightened carefully. Extra layers might be added if available. The door flap was reinforced. And then they waited. There's something almost meditative about being forced to stop. No riding out, no long-distance travel. Just the sound of wind pressing against the curved walls. Inside, tasks continued quietly. Leather tack was repaired. Clothing was patched. Children practiced tying knots or memorizing clan lineages. Knowledge passed from elder to youth, not in classrooms, but in circles around the stove. And the stove, always the stove, remained the beating heart of survival.
Fuel management was an art form. Dried dung collected months earlier had to last the season. Too much burned at once, and you risked running out before spring. Too little, and frost crept inward. People learned to read the fire the way they read the sky. Now imagine stepping outside during a storm, just briefly, to check on the animals. You wrap your deal tightly, pull the fur hat down low. The air bites instantly. Exposed skin stiffens within seconds. Breath crystallizes in front of your face. And yet, herders did this daily. Horses were the real heroes of winter. Unlike sheep, they could scrape through snow to reach buried grass. Their thick winter coats insulated them naturally. They huddled together for warmth, tails turned against the wind. Mongols trusted their horses deeply. A good horse was more than transportation. It was partnership. And that bond was tested in the worst winters. There is a word in Mongolian history that carries weight: dzud. A dzud is not just a cold winter, it is a catastrophic one. Heavy snow followed by deep freeze, ice crusts forming over grass, animals unable to feed. When a dzud struck, survival became fragile. Entire herds could perish. Families could lose their primary source of food and wealth in a single season. And yet, communities adapted. Those with surplus animals might lend to relatives. Clans reorganized grazing patterns. People migrated further than usual, seeking less affected areas. Flexibility again. This mobility is what later allowed Mongol armies under Genghis Khan to move swiftly across continents. But before it was a military advantage, it was a survival strategy learned in brutal winters. Even as the empire expanded into warmer regions, into parts of China, Persia, and beyond, the core nomadic lifestyle remained powerful. Leaders often preferred the steppe. Palaces were fine. Heated stone buildings were impressive, but many Mongol elites still returned to their gers, because the ger was not primitive, it was efficient. In winter, its low profile reduced heat loss. The thick felt breathed just enough to prevent suffocation, but retained warmth beautifully. Snow piled around it like an extra blanket. There's a quiet irony there. The same snow that threatened animals could help insulate human homes. Inside, life had its softer moments. Music was played on simple instruments like the Morin hor, the horsehead fiddle. Its low, resonant tones filled the circular space gently. Songs told stories of ancestors, lost loves, wide landscapes. Lullabies were soft and repetitive, perfect for drifting off beside a crackling stove while the wind argued with the outside world. Children grew up not fearing the cold, but respecting it. They learned that frostbite begins as numbness, that metal should never be touched with bare skin, that animals sense storms before humans do. Practical knowledge was everything.
Women managed household resources with precision. Food supplies were monitored carefully. Dried meat was rationed. Dairy reserves were protected. Clothing was mended repeatedly. Nothing was wasted. Men often handled distant herding tasks and defense, but roles were flexible when necessary. Survival didn't care much about rigid categories. And amid all this, there was a surprising amount of laughter. Yes, even at -50. Human beings adapt not only physically, but emotionally. Jokes about stubborn camels, teasing about someone's crooked fur hat, light sarcasm about whose turn it was to break ice for water. Because when the world outside is trying to freeze you solid, humor becomes another layer of insulation. Let's drift outward for a moment. Picture the steppe under moonlight, snow reflecting pale silver. No trees, no fences, just open space. The sky enormous overhead. It's easy to understand why Tengri, the eternal blue sky, held spiritual significance. Living under such vastness shapes a culture. You feel small, but also connected to something immense. And maybe that perspective made the cold feel less personal. The wind wasn't cruel, it was simply part of the order of things. By early spring, subtle changes appeared. The air softened slightly. Snow began to crust differently underfoot. Animals grew restless. Surviving winter wasn't about defeating it, it was about outlasting it. And when the first hints of thaw arrived, there was no dramatic celebration, just quiet relief. Fires burned a little less urgently. Herds spread out cautiously. Families prepared to move camps once again. The gers would be dismantled piece by piece, wooden lattice folded, poles stacked neatly, felt rolled tightly and secured. Within hours, what had been a warm home in an ocean of frost became a compact bundle ready for travel. Mobility returned. That's the real secret of how Mongols survived -50 degrees on the open steppe. Not just insulation, not just clothing, not just fire. It was movement, community, memory, adaptation layered over generations. They did not try to anchor themselves permanently in frozen ground. They flowed with the seasons. And so, as our long winter evening winds down, picture that final night before migration. The stove glowing low, the felt walls steady against the cold. A family sleeping in a circle, wrapped in furs, listening to the wind pass by. Outside, the steppe stretches endlessly, unforgiving, beautiful, vast. Inside, warmth hums quietly. And somehow, against all odds, life continues.